Hello there. This one is called My Curious Relationship with Time. I guess the fact that I don't see time as linear could have something to do with it, but then again, I don't think it's relevant because it's always been like this. So I guess the first really significant experience I had about how curious time is was when I was a full-time teacher in a state secondary school for the bottom 60% of the ability range, as it used to say. And there was one day I found myself sitting in the staff room, unable to move, and I had absolutely no idea what's going on. I hadn't been able to speak for 3 weeks at that point. I'd had a bit of a flu-like illness, and I was going in every day and teaching, miming, writing stuff down on the blackboard, and just getting by. And then this one morning in the staff room, I couldn't move out of the chair, and I realised, ooh, gosh, something really is weird going on here. And eventually someone came in, and I asked them to call me a taxi, and I went to a doctor. And that was the start of my journey to discover I had something which is called flu-like illness. Then a few months later, post-viral fatigue syndrome. Then another 9 months later, it was called ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which means inflammation of the muscles and the lining around the brain, technically speaking. And it was my 10-year introduction into a full-blown shamanic illness, which took away all my conventional functionality and ability to do what I was used to doing. And I was 37 at that point, 37, 38, something like that. And that was my first really big, deep taste of old age. Because suddenly all these things that I had been able to do, I couldn't do anymore. And at that point I was working as a full-time teacher, married to Cinda, who had the cancer, and with 2 children, family, living in a council house. And that was my life, and all of a sudden it was like the rug got pulled, and I spent a lot of the time lying on the sofa, unable to move, and other such things. So it was truly my first taste of not being able to operate, being in a state of what felt like utter exhaustion, but many years later was discovered to be simply electrosensitivity, which was causing me to become so easily overcharged with energy that I actually went into what was called shutdown mode. And looking at it through the lens of the autistic spectrum situation, actually it was working 7 days a week, very full time, as a state school teacher, and masking in order to survive the job, much less the children and much more the establishment. And going into what people with autism would call burnout. So you get shut down when things get too much, but if you carry on having to function or choosing to function when you really aren't capable, then you eventually get burnout, which is a 10-year experience of not being able to function. So that was my first really big taste of what old age is like. And there have been other times in my life when I've had those experiences. Then I also get the opposite experience, which is every time I host a retreat, almost every time, when people who get to know me say, but you just run about like a young guy in his early 20s. And there's my recent experience in India, where a guy who, right from his dad actually, worked out that we were very, very close in age, and I do believe he was a little bit older than me, maybe by a matter of weeks. I did do a Korean bow to him and acknowledge his seniority, which he found absolutely hilarious. Not shy about bowing either, that dude. Great to have met him. And he says, "You're like a boy," and it's like... And in India, I did feel like I was in my 30s, actually. So, very, very flexible relationship with time has characterized me throughout my life. And I guess there is an advantage to this, because it's like, at some point I will experience what's called old age, and then a very recent experience. You've only got to look at that film of me lying on the sofa in pain and struggling, and it's like, yeah, okay, that was another taste of old age. But being in India, it was like I was doing all sorts of things. I even crossed the motorway. I think that's hilarious. Did it more than once as well. And I really did feel, yeah, I guess that's about how I felt. Something like in my 30s, happy to rush up and down the stairs. Very similar to being on a retreat, actually. So it really does vary with me. And over the years, I have wondered what that was about. And the only thing I've ever noticed, which really does puzzle me, is that I have had the good fortune to get to know people who've experienced what people now call CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and also dissociative identity disorder, conditions like that. And that is the mind's sane response to trauma too horrible to contemplate. I actually was part of a group that met for the weekend working on all this stuff. Made two good friends there as well. But also throughout life, I've noticed that people who've been through really horrific experiences, they appear significantly younger than other people. And I've never come across an explanation for that. It's only been one of those things that, yeah, there's that phenomenon. I'm noticing that one again. And I've had it both ways. I've had people say to me that I look significantly younger in years than I actually am. And I've said to other people they look significantly younger in years, and they just told me what they are. And the only thing I've ever been able to come up with, which is not an answer at all, is that people who go through these really horrific experiences, it's like, well, that's pretty shit. So where's the silver lining? And I think one of the silver linings is I have a different relationship with time from other people. I have a feeling that those really severe initiations, because that's what these things are, and I do apologise to anyone who's going through such things still, because you're going to find it very hard to understand that definition, but I regard all such things to be very profound, extremely powerful initiations, which means, of course, they've been dragged completely out of their comfort zones, maybe drugged as well, who knows, but they've been dragged out of their comfort zones, and they've been subjected to all sorts of experiences. It seems to change the person's relationship with time. And then there's another thing for us. Anyone who's worked with plant medicines has a much more flexible relationship with time. And I learned that really early on in my early relationship experiences with the plant medicine cannabis. And in fact, people that have worked with that medicine often call it time dilation effects, which is the plant does something to the person's perception of time. And it's rather like a concertina, where the concertina is going in and out. So time slows down, time speeds up, slows down, speeds up. It's a really good metaphor for a lot of plant medicines, actually. So that's something else. Just the fact that you've had some really shaking up experiences with regards to time. Wow, no, you can't be serious. That can't be 10 minutes. That feels like about 3 days. That kind of thing. So that's another thing that can really affect people's relationship with time. And I guess I am very, very grateful for all the experience I have of premature old age, and also way retarded youthening times, because it makes me realise how everything is so much more subjective than people generally see things. And I will actually throw something else in as well. When I was working in medical pathology in a hospital in London, near Hyde Park Corner, I can remember once getting out of a tube train, walking out of the station, and this guy accosts me and is holding up a piece of photocopied paper. And it's a poem, and he wrote it, and it's called "The Clock is a Tyrant." And I am immediately intrigued by the title, give him the money he asked for, and that had a major impact on me, because what the guy was basically saying is, don't become enslaved by the clock. It's another form of tyranny which people subject themselves to on a voluntary, often quite conscious basis. And I ended up years later being a state school teacher, as I just mentioned at the beginning of the film. Well, talk about clocks and tyranny, but I was so lucky because every single teacher in the school, except for me, has a bell in the classroom which would ring at the end of the lesson. My classroom was so far away from the rest of the school, like a good 10 minutes walk, and there was no bell installed. So actually I used to control the time, and I used to be as flexible as I could be about it without getting into serious strife with the school establishment. And I loved that freedom that I had, and the fact that it was unique was rather something. But the poem from the dudes on the underground, that really was something, helped me to understand that actually the more you free yourself from control vis-a-vis time, the more liberated you feel. That's certainly been my experience. And it was a funny thing, because actually after having been the state school teacher for 4 years, getting the ME, it wasn't until about 18 months after I got the ME that I actually finally realised I was still wearing this thing on my hand called a watch. And I was in a camp at the time, and the watch had become such an intrinsic part of my being I hadn't noticed its existence. Sounds a bit crazy, but it was true. And because I finally noticed it, I just took it off and threw it on the bed in my caravan and never saw it again. And that was the end of my enslavement by the clock, which is rather lovely. So I am very curious about my relationship with time, and I'm very curious about your relationship with time too. So how is it for you? How do you relate to time? Do you find it just marches on like a river or like a linear thing? Or do you find it goes up and down and all over the place and dips in and out and disappears and comes back? What's your relationship with time like? I'd love to hear from you. I'd always love to hear from you. As you know, I make these films. And of course, you're most welcome to, I'm actually going to remember to say it. I don't ever normally say this, but yes, you are, of course, even though I don't say it, but I'm saying it this time, welcome to like, comment, subscribe, dislike, ignore, whatever you want to do. So all love to you. And thank you for coming with me on this little journey about my curious relationship with time. And yes, it's the morning of the summer solstice. I'll just show that in at the end of the film. All love to you.